let's take a look at gender in the workplace. This course discusses and evaluates theories of gender segregation at work and the related ideologies of gender equality. It examines how these theories approach employed and unemployed workers, men and women, in society. It's important to consider the role of prevailing employment norms in a society and gender segregation of the labor force arising from those norms. It's also important to discuss change ideologies related to issues of gender equality within employment contexts. Gender equality at work refers to the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women and men in employment. Equality does not mean that women and men will become the same, but that women's and men's rights, responsibilities, and opportunities will not depend on whether they're born male or female. Gender equality implies that the interests, needs, and priorities of both women and men are taken into consideration, recognizing the diversity of different groups of women and men. Gender segregation in occupations is the tendency for men and women to be employed in different occupations across the entire spectrum of jobs as a result of patterns of socialization. Horizontal segregation is where the workforce of a specific industry is mostly made up of one gender. Vertical segregation is where opportunities for career progression within a company or sector for a particular gender are narrowed. Gender stereotypes that have been enforced regarding the role of women over the years and the actions of others who have had an influence on women's progression in the workplace have led to problems such as the gender pay gap. Despite a woman's competence to fulfill the needs of their job and progress further within the organization, they often face more challenges to make it to top leadership roles than men do to social, cultural, and racial biases. The gender pay gap refers to the difference in earnings between men and women in the workplace, especially in cases where men and women are paid differently for completing tasks which are of similar value and require comparable skill. Human resource practices and managers and supervisors play an important part in reducing this gender pay gap. Different theories of gender segregation explain the reasons for gender inequality at work. Marxist theories argue that women can enter into paid jobs when there is a shortage of male labor, but they're also expected to leave formal employment when they're no longer required. Marxist theorists demonstrate how gender inequalities are exploited by capitalists to achieve the greater economic advantage. Marxist feminism seeks to dismantle capitalism in order to achieve women's liberation. This analysis has been challenged by some feminist scholars who argue for a holistic approach towards gender inequality, such as sociocultural, religious, and economic factors. Historically, radical feminism started in the 1970s with the assumption that men have power over women and that society and its various social relationships can be best understood in terms of their relationship to that situation. Radical feminists consider the concept of patriarchy as the basis of oppression in employment. Today, patriarchy refers to the systems and structures that accommodate the power of men over women. A new theory endeavors to explain the dual role of the capitalist system and patriarchy in producing and sustaining gender segregation in the labor force. Dual systems theory has been criticized by post-structuralists who argue that structural theories ignore the diverse experiences of women and men at work. Feminist post-structuralism looks at philosophically the ways in which men and women are treated in the world and attempts to break down barriers by identifying how societal influences have led to the status quo. They argue that, depending on who controls the dominant discourses of representation, women and men can be included or excluded from employment and other societal contexts. Human capital theorists argue that because of the traditional gender division of labor involving women's engagement with house chores and rearing children, they have fewer skills and less labor market experience than men. According to this perspective, human capital decreases when the worker is out of the labor market for some time, which results in low wages on re-entry. Human capital theory faces much criticism from sociologists. Employment rewards cannot be solely determined by labor demand and supply, and women who are equal with men in terms of human capital still do not enjoy the same high income. Career imbalance starts between male and female graduates with more or less the same qualifications. An increasing trend with industrialized countries has been to promote equal opportunity to attract skilled women. The liberal approach towards equal employment opportunity in organizations is aimed at achieving the removal of discriminatory policies and practices in employment. The business case is focused on convincing managerial audiences that equity is profitable, assuming that employers would make their decisions on recruitment and career development on the basis of bottom-line considerations. The radical approach challenges the existing organizational and social structures in the quest for equality for disadvantaged groups based on some ethical and moral principle. Radical approaches ensure the noticeable attendance of both women and men at the workplace and seek the eradication of the barriers to advancement faced by disadvantaged groups. Discrimination in hiring decisions is a complex phenomenon in organizational life. Some argue that affirmative action is a reform of tokenism, something that delays real change towards attaining equality. The concept of transformational change towards equal employment opportunities is the alternative mechanism. The approach argues that organizations benefit from diversity, including workers from disadvantaged groups in society. Diversity theory is predominantly focused on the business case. In contrast, the transformational approach is mainly concerned with moral and ethical cases for equality. Transformational change aims at changing organizational systems to promote diversity among its entire staff, not only as a business choice, but also as a moral and ethical requirement. Well, in the past few decades, there's been significant progress in many countries regarding legislation on equal employment. Legislation per se is not sufficient to explain the progress on equal opportunity in society. There are several other factors which need to be considered to develop a holistic view of equal opportunity. Previous research has shown that practices cannot be solely comprehended by evaluating organizational policy. This multi-level perspective framework enables us to assess how societal factors such as gender, culture, religion, law, and economic factors impact employment opportunities for women. One study of an Australian model supported the notion that the adoption of a multi-level framework can achieve better business outcomes and equity outcomes with a diverse workforce. By looking at 3 perspective levels, it's been found that the legislation in Australia makes little effort to enforce management of cultural diversity by organizations. Even though it's possible that the multi-level framework can bring many benefits, there are limitations with the model. As the model aims at improving business outcomes as well as social outcomes through equal employment opportunity and social inclusion, it will take longer to achieve such outcomes, and the cost to government and organizations will be much higher. They also suggest that it's not necessary for organizations to operate beyond economic and legal responsibility.